At around 9:30 p.m. Dallas time on the night after the race, 2:30 in the morning UK time, lightning struck York Minster, hitting a metal electrical box inside the roof of the south transept and causing a fire in the medieval wooden ceiling. The blaze quickly took hold, gutting the roof of the oldest part of the cathedral dating from around 1220. 114 firemen from around the area converged on the fire and pulled the burning roof in before the flames could spread to the rest of the building. The medieval stained glass, including the famous rose window, shattered in the heat, but fortunately was held together by the leading, allowing it to later be removed and restored. The fact that just 2 days earlier the Minster had hosted the investiture of controversial Bishop David Jenkins was not lost on some of the more traditionally minded Anglicans. A few days later, press tycoon Robert Maxwell acquired the Mirror Group, a stable of 6 British newspapers led by the Daily Mirror and the Scottish Daily Record, the only British tabloids to have consistently supported the Labour Party. This acquisition ignited a battle with Rupert Murdoch, owner of competing and conservative-aligned tabloids The Sun and the News of the World. New Zealand went to the polls in what was dubbed the Schnapps election, a snap election called a month earlier by National Party PM Robert Muldoon, who was visibly drunk on television when making the announcement.
We've worked out at Government House as being the appropriate date.
That doesn't give him much time to run up to an election, Prime Minister.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
A record high turnout of 93.5% delivered a decisive defeat to Muldoon, putting Labour back in power under the leadership of David Lange. And back in the UK, the Central Electricity Generating Board had set up a demonstration to reassure the public that there was no danger in the transport of spent nuclear fuel by rail to the reprocessing plant at Sellafield in Cumbria. Laying one of the transport flasks diagonally across a section of rail at the British Rail Old Dalby test track, at what was calculated to be the worst possible angle for it to be struck, a 140-ton Class 46 diesel engine and 3 coaches were slammed into it at over 100 miles an hour. The results were spectacular. Subsequent tests showed that while the nuclear flask was banged up a bit, the seals were completely intact and no pressure had been lost. The locomotive and coaches were a complete write-off. "I hope this convinces people," said the head of the CEGB, "because I don't really see what else we can do." The Formula One circus, meanwhile, and particularly the British contingent, were concerned with 2 other matters which had rather taken the gloss off what looked like being a weekend of glorious weather at Brands Hatch. Firstly, Nigel Mansell had been given a $6,000 fine and a suspended 6-month ban by FISA for his role in the start line crash at Detroit. And secondly, the tribunal in Paris had ejected the Tyrrell team from the championship. While they were about it, they also fined Jackie Ickx and withdrew his race director's licence for not consulting FISA before stopping the Monaco Grand Prix. Despite Ken Tyrrell's protestations that the water tanks weren't in any way connected to the fuel tank, and that any hydrocarbons in the water was just contamination, the verdict was that the team were ejected for fuel irregularities. Moreover, the lead-shot ballast found in the water tanks was also ruled illegal. The rules said that any ballast had to be fixed such that it took tools to remove it, and that loose plastic packets of shot in a water tank weren't fixed. Ken Tyrrell said that you certainly would need tools to get them out of the water tank. FISA alleged that shot was added to the water tanks at the end of the race, allowing them to run underweight for most of the race. Tyrrell pointed at his lap times, which got faster towards the end of the race rather than slowing down as you'd expect if extra weight had been added. It didn't matter, but Ken Tyrrell made it very clear that he would be appealing on every level up to and including the United Nations, and in the meantime managed to claim an injunction from the British High Court allowing the team to participate at Brands Hatch. The FIA elected not to press the matter, simply noting that it was the championship that the team had been ejected from, and whether the Royal Automobile Club allowed them to participate in the British Grand Prix was entirely up to them. What would happen if the team finished a car in the top 6 would be interesting. The other problem Ken Tyrrell had was that he needed a new driver, with Martin Brundle's ankle still healing. In came Stefan Johansson, who had been driving Porsches for Used Racing in the World Endurance Championship after being dropped by Spirit at the end of 1983. His Tyrrell would be bedecked with Union Jacks and sponsorship from Systime Computer Solutions, the previous deals with Yardley and DeLonghi having expired. Stefan himself, meanwhile, had a new helmet design, replacing the plain black one he'd worn last year. His father, also a racing driver, had been known as The Leaf, and Stefan was Little Leaf, so a new design with leaves in the colours of the Swedish flag was made. Elsewhere, Theo Fabi was back in the Brabham, Ozella had a second car for Joe Gartner for the rest of the season, and Williams had an updated FW09B chassis for their two drivers with a longer wheelbase and wasted side pods. The weekend started badly when Johnny Cecotto had an enormous smash at Westfield Bend after just 4 minutes of Friday practice, breaking both ankles and one knee, which was becoming something of a theme, and leading to a delay while he was airlifted to hospital and the barriers repaired, but his teammate Senna was flying, setting the fastest time of the day. Brabham was still struggling with their setup for most of Friday, but seemed to finally get the hang of it sufficiently for Piquet to scorch round on Saturday in 1 minute 10.87 seconds to take pole ahead of the McLarens of Prost and Lauda, with De Angelis 4th, then Rosberg and Warwick, Senna, a slightly disappointed but still good 7th, Mansell a fed-up 8th, and Alboreto and Tombe putting the best face they could on 9th and 10th. Arnoux and Fabi were back on row 7, while both Tyrrells qualified, Johansson beating Bell off at the first time of asking, with Gartner the unlucky odd one out. That was until Enzo Ozella asked the perfectly reasonable question of what would happen if the Tyrrell ban was upheld. How was it fair that his driver could miss out thanks to the presence of two potentially illegal cars on the grid? The stewards elected to allow Gartner to start too, so everyone was happy. A record 90,000 plus packed into Brands Hatch on Sunday morning, with more than a few Tyrrell banners in evidence in the stands, and after all the usual summer holiday razzmatazz, air displays, marching bands, funfair rides, it was time to get down to some racing. The parade lap completed in scorching weather, the lights went green, and away they went, with Piquet maintaining his lead ahead of Prost, and De Angelis nipping through into third. But as the field streamed down to the Graham Hill bend, Patrese, trying a little too hard after a bad qualifying, got sideways and caused his teammate Cheever behind him to stamp on the brakes. The American collected Gartner in the rear, then Alio demolished his ram on the pair of them, and the debris took out Johansson into the bargain. Patrese, ironically, was able to continue back to the pits and have his car repaired, so there were 4 casualties on the first lap. None of which bothered the leaders, as Piquet continued in the lead with Prost hot on his gearbox, while De Angelis had lost places to both Lauda and Warwick. Rosberg's miserable season continued as his Honda engine gave up the ghost on lap 6, promoting Senna into 6th place, with Alboreto behind him. The lead 3 were now pulling out quite a lead over Warwick, as Winkelhock made his customary early exit, albeit thanks to a spin rather than a broken engine for a change. Prost hung on Piquet's rear with Lauda right up behind the pair too, and on lap 11, Piquet made a tiny error and Prost squeezed through at the end of the start-finish straight, followed by Lauda. Piquet decided at that point to switch to a hard tyre compound and go to the end of the race rather than making a stop midway, but he had to stay out an extra lap as Fabi came in to retire the number 2 Brabham, and at that point Jonathan Palmer had a colossal off in the other ram at Clearways, demolishing both chassis and tyre wall and distributing parts across the track. The marshals decided that it was enough of a hazard 12 laps into a 72-lap race and red-flagged proceedings while they cleared the track. The positions were to be taken as at the end of lap 11, and a half-hour break was called to clear the track. Much to the voluble objection of the McLaren team, Piquet was therefore allowed to complete his tyre change during the break, having already entered the pit lane when the flags come out, and not only that, but with the positions backdated to lap 11, Nelson would be back on pole for the second start. Ron Dennis was thumbing through the rulebook, and Prost loudly remonstrating with Jean-Marie Balestre. Some of the other cars abandoned around the circuit were also retrieved during the break, while the intrepid Barry Gill in the pits chatted to Renault team manager Jean Sage, who was bullish about Derek Warwick's prospects of a maiden win in front of his home fans.
Second half of the race, and do you think Derek can do it?
Yes, I think he can do it, we're waiting for his first win, he nearly did it about 3 times.
And Eddie Cheever, who didn't seem entirely thrilled with his teammate.
We were going down the hill, and Patrese tried to pass somebody going down the hill, and he spun. And I went to the right. I just managed to get around of him, and somebody hit me in the back, and then they just knocked on the back of my car. Now we're trying to get it fixed. Maybe we might be able to get out, and who knows where racing goes, we might finish the points.
Well, what you're saying is that the Jonathan Palmer accident could be very good luck for you.
By the way, is he all right?
Yes, he's fine, else we wouldn't have made a remark like that, Eddie. No, he's fine, but the race has been stopped, and you're saying that your lads are now working on it.
My race is over. From the minute that Patrese spun, my race is over. But there is a good possibility that I'll be in the race, and I will do a few miles, and we might, You've got to be in there to get something. If you're not in there, forget it.
Eddie, I'm glad you're all right. Good news about Jonathan, and we look forward to seeing you in the second half of the race.
Neither did the Ram technicians with the results of their drivers' exploits, though Palmer himself seemed calm enough, describing how the steering had just snapped out on him with no warning. Meanwhile, everybody else waited. The fans, the other drivers, the world's media. Eventually, and to no one's great surprise, McLaren's protests were waved away. Piquet would start on pole, and a lap would be scrubbed from the race to account from the extra parade lap, with the result calculated as an aggregate of the times for the two races. 19 cars lined up for the second start, and away they went, a fired-up Prost taking the lead straight away from the harder-tyred Piquet, with Lauda third, followed by the pairs of Renault and Lotus Renault cars. Once again, the top three began to pull away from the rest, with Warwick and Tombe, then De Angelis, Senna and Alboreto giving chase, and Mansell dropping back rapidly. Lafitte was the first retirement of the second stint, as Prost began to just ease away from Piquet and Lauda. Warwick was staying in touch but wasn't able to make much an impression on the others, and the race seemed to settle down after its rather frantic start. Meanwhile, a terrific scrap had developed further back in the field as Andrea de Cesaris, having a good day in the Ligier for a change, was defending 8th place from the two Ferraris, who were also having their own private battle over 9th, Arnoux taking it from Alboreto as they exited the main straight, while Mansell toured off with yet another fritzed gearbox. Lauda got ahead of Piquet off camera on lap 29, but couldn't gain on his teammate, while De Angelis had caught back up to Tombe and was angling after 5th. Back in the De Cesaris Arnoux-Alboreto battle, Arnoux shaped up to pass the Ligier, only to have to bail out of the move when Sura emerged from the pits at precisely the wrong moment, and a few laps later Tombe pitted and found himself just in front of the trio too. Suddenly, on lap 37, the gap between Prost and Lauda decreased dramatically from over 10 seconds to just over 2, as the lead McLaren started suffering from gearbox troubles of his own. Sura unlapped himself, Piquet came past, and Prost toured in to retire. So after 38 laps, the aggregate positions were Lauda leading Piquet, with Warwick now 3rd, De Angelis 4th, Senna 5th and Tombe 6th, with the Ligier Ferrari battle right behind him, Alboreto having now got back ahead of Arnoux. Piquet was starting to slowly catch Lauda again as the McLaren's softer tyres began to wear. Soon enough, Lauda was approaching the De Cesaris Alboreto Arnoux scrap, which might give Piquet just the opening he needed as the three held him up. There was a hairy moment as Alboreto elbowed his way past De Cesaris, who nearly took the pair of them off rather than yield the space, but other than that it was reasonably plain sailing, and once they were through, Piquet had caught Lauda a little, and it was a straight race once more. Sort of, at least. Lauda was actually another 6 seconds ahead on aggregate, so if Nelson did get past, he'd still need to lead by 6 seconds or more to win the race. Lauda was driving at full tilt, and began to ease out again from Piquet, and the gap started increasing more rapidly as Piquet's engine started to fade. With the battle for the lead thus essentially over, attention turned further down the field as Senna and De Angelis fought for 4th, as they made their way through the ongoing Arnoux-De Cesaris battle to lap them. Senna had caught right up to the Lotus and dived through on the inside with almost contemptuous ease to take the position, though he was still some 3 seconds behind on aggregate. Piquet's engine was sounding very poorly indeed by now, and he was losing places as Warwick came through, then Senna and De Angelis moving up into 4th and 3rd as the race entered its final few laps. Senna had his foot down to try and get those extra few seconds he needed, which proved easier than he thought as De Angelis began to run out of fuel and slowed down to try and coax his car home. Niki Lauda cruised home to take the win, which would not only open up the 1984 championship, but saw him overtake Jackie Stewart's all-time points-scoring record. Derek Warwick crossed the line second after a solid, if rather lonely race, to immense acclaim from the fans on the circuit, and Ayrton Senna took his second podium place in a quite remarkable first 10 races. De Angelis hung on for 4th, Tombe would have finished 5th, except his engine blew on the last lap, so Alboreto and Arnoux inherited the last couple of points places, De Cesaris having had a spin to remove himself from under their feet. Piquet coughed home 7th, Tombe was classified 8th, and Beloff brought home the Tyrrell 11th, presumably wondering if it would be for the last time. Sports car commitments meant that he would miss his home race in Germany anyway, and a lot could happen in the intervening time. So Niki Lauda now closed to just 1.5 points behind Prost in the standings, with De Angelis maintaining 3rd, while Warwick moved up to 6th ahead of Piquet, and Senna was now equal with his F3 rival Brundle. McLaren extended their Constructors' Championship lead, while Renault moved past Williams and Brabham into 4th, and Toleman overtook the lavishly funded Alfa Romeo team into 8th.